Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages podcast. This is the podcast where we have a coffee with the world's most interesting writers to inspire your reading and your writing. And it's all crafted and curated by me, Liam Bishop. Now, what can we learn about winning and losing the lottery? Should we be worried when our children get fixated on death? And what life lessons can the Sopranos teach us? These are the questions at the heart of Camille Bordas' collection One Son Only, published by Serpent's Tale. What I loved about these stories, however, is their wonderfully dry humour, empathetic narratives of flawed characters, and deeply woven observations within the stories about how fiction works. Plaudits for Camille have come from George Saunders, Zadie Smith, and Percival Everett, among others. She's also a regular contributor to The New Yorker. She's written in French and English, and some of those English novels include The Material and How to Behave in a Crowd, the prior of which was also published by Profile. She's also happened to live in two of my favorite cities, Paris and Mexico City, and she lives in one of the cities that I would love to visit, which is Chicago. Camille Bordas, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Rippling Pages.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Liam.
Thanks for being on the show, but I understand you're not actually in Chicago at the minute.
Not at the moment. I'm finishing the school year at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. So yeah, I'm not at home currently. My computer is very elevated on many cardboard boxes right now because there's nowhere comfortable to do this. So I hope this mountain doesn't crumble. But yeah,
Oh, well, we'll find out, and the listeners will
yeah,
find
it
out as
will be a
well. But
nice sound.
I like it. It's a bit of treachery. That's a bit of treachery to the
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
We've got to get this in
Yeah.
before the box
Also,
falls.
yeah, we might talk about it, but my back has started hurting a lot. I think it's
Oh
the
no.
writer's ailment. So like, no, I'm just like doing everything that I can standing up. So I'm yeah, but I hear it's normal. I'm friends with older writers and say, well, this is what happens. The upper back gives up at 27, and then in your late 30s, the lower back will go as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I've just hit 35. I just hit. But okay. Well, it's good to know. Sorry to hear that you're enjoying that, but otherwise,
That's
thanks
fine.
for sort of doing this anyway. And is that a lot of teaching that you do? Is that the kind of the life it's sort of leading?
Yes, I think, yeah, right now, yeah, teaching, I love teaching. I was doing it for many years for master students, so people who really wanted to become writers. And right now I'm at Duke University. It's more for undergraduate students, so people who are like dabbling in fiction for the first time. Then,
Mm,
they love reading, but they have never really written anything before. So it's another type of exercise, and it's really,
yeah.
really fun. Yeah.
Want to get into the stories and this collection, One Son Only. But before we do, if you enjoy this episode or any other episode of the Ripping Pages, please leave a review, a 5-star review if you enjoy it that much on your favorite podcast provider. I love hearing from you. You can leave a question there, you can leave comments, and it boosts the show across those podcast providers and making sure that we get all our wonderful guests, into listeners' ears. But yeah, let's get into it, Camille. And
Mhm.
well, you don't write about creative writing classes, do you? But one of your novels is set within the MFA of a
Yes.
comedy writing class. And well, let's go from a joke to the opposite end of the spectrum, perhaps. And but because you do start with this, and you do start by talking about um, death, and you've sort of gone from jokes to death, and there's a lot of death, and there's a lot of discussion of it, at least in your stories. Can we just start by talking about the first and the title story, One Son Only?
It's good to start like with the easy questions, like, like it's a good
Yeah.
strategy to start like with death so that I can solve it for our listeners and they can be like
Well, let's have a
relaxed.
look
Like
at it. Well, I just find it very interesting that you've gone in with. Well, actually, probably it's less so about death, um, and it's more about the relationship between the father and the son, and how
yeah,
death features within their
yes.
relationship. So, can we talk about that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, One Son Only, it was really hard to put this collection together. Like, this is 10 years of stories. Basically, it's
Mm,
12 stories, and there's definitely like thematic coherence there. Like, it does talk about, like, not talk necessarily directly about death, but there's a lot of,
yeah.
um, yeah, not always grief going on, but a lot of questions around it, which I think, like it is the big question. And so I realized when I was putting the collection together, I was like, oh, there's death everywhere and all these stories, and I don't want to start on a downer. But then the first collection opens with a series of death, like very much in the vein of like Barthelme's story of the school. But I do think it can be like a source of jokes. But in that story particularly, like I don't tend to write autobiographically, but that relationship between father and son was not my relationship with my father, but it's something that I see happening with my friends who have kids. Like there's an age at which children start asking questions that are very difficult to answer. And I see my sisters, my brother kind of struggle. How do I
Mm,
explain this to this kid? And I'm assuming it also triggers back memories to when they were children and had questions. So I don't know. I liked to think of these three generations because there's also the grandfathers, grandfather, father, and son, and
mm,
how they each like kind of try to make sense of it for pack it up for their children to understand. But
mm,
it seems in that case, in One Son Only, that the child has much more access and comfort in talking about it or thinking about it than the father does. So there's that friction there where like the kid is very comfortable drawing dead bodies and the father starts freaking out a little bit.
and it's got like characteristic humor that shapes your work, but it's just that dynamic of, and this is what I find interesting because reading your work and reading your stories, you seem like a writer who is very interested in writing about or trying to find
Mhm.
ways to how do we, whether it's death, whether it's jokes, whether it's something else entirely, how do we
Mhm.
talk about some of these topics?
Well, there's like a lot of options. Like in my case, it was like more. I think there's a very honest route, which is like we don't know when it will happen, we don't know what comes after, and that's kind of be very scary for a child. And there's the option to lie or like or try to make up stories about how it all goes out. And I think like both strategies are valid, but I think they create very different types of people, maybe.
Mm,
And so I think, I mean, I shouldn't generalize, but in my case, there was like really honest parents, like, we don't know, it could happen right now, it could happen in 80 years. And so I think that created the kind of anxious person I am, which is who is always thinking, oh, is it today? Is it, like, so it's just like there's a sense of urgency, but also like I make fun of it a lot because obviously I'm able to, live a normal life in spite of this anxiety. But I think I learned to kind of make fun of it a little bit. And I think what I want the stories to be is, or they're also funny, hopefully. And but yeah, I think it is the big question. The problem with this is it erases everything else. And so like, yeah, I like to have my stories very alive on the page while they can. And
mm,
that's the thing that comes at the end. Like they try to ignore it or face it on. It doesn't really matter. The outcome will be the same. But yeah, in the
mm.
meantime, they do their things and have their weird conversations.
Yeah, and it seems to be that expectant. Right, there's a part where they talk about so Ernest
Mhm.
was drawing all of these scenes, which would be, yeah, I guess would be quite shocking to a parent. I mean, I'm not a child. I'm not a child. Obviously, I'm not a child. I'm not a parent. But
Oh
I,
no.
I guess I can think that's when that consciousness of that came to. But what I find is that it's that idea around the sort of expectant reaction. And I guess why was it the dynamic? Because it's rather than the child that I feel concern about. It's more the reaction of the father,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's what you're honing in on. And I think that's as a him as a writer.
I try to inhabit his perspective also, I think out of curiosity. So the child is more like what I would have been. So I was not so curious about, I mean, I was not as traumatized, but I did have a lot of questions that remained unanswered and it created a lot of anxiety. So the child I was not so interested in exploring his interiorities was very familiar to me. So it was more like, what do you do as an old, like now I'm in my late 30s, like I'm at the age where I could potentially guide a child or a teen, like, so what would the things be that I could tell to reassure them?
Mm,
Is it better to be honest or is it better to be comforting? So yeah, like it's more like this dynamic of what stories do you tell a younger person to help them like, yeah, through life.
mm. Yeah, and I love that. There's a real tenderness, but there's also real dry humor to it.
Yep.
I love the child's name, Ernest.
Yes.
Is very earnest. But I think it was just there's so many ideas within that then about that whole dynamic of him drawing these, him trying to depict death, him trying to depict
Yeah.
something. and how the people respond to that, and how the father responds to that, and they do things like which we all, I remember this as a child. We get our best work at school put on a refrigerator, on the fridge.
Yeah, and his drawings are not for public consumption. So but I liked also to go through a child, through his thoughts, through his drawings. Oftentimes my stories, they don't emerge from nonfiction that I read, but I did read this book about children's drawing in wartime, like what they and so this book kind of made its way into the story, like how would a traumatized child draw like the sky or his village. And so it kind of like crystallized with Ernest's perspective and art.
Yeah, and it's that sense of taste, I guess, as well, which a child might not have. They are prone to putting things out there, and because they're not as in this world of manners as we sort of learn as adults. You've come from a sociology background, I believe.
Yes, I do. Also, like, I think I read a lot of nonfiction, and most of it doesn't make it into my work, obviously, but sometimes I'm really drawn to the topic or a line or an image. And so, like, it's the same with the story Most Die Young in the collection about like this. I mean, it's not about, but there's like mention of this warless tribe of like people who do not want to engage when when war is being waged on them, who are like, and so so the idea of a warless society really interested me, and so I kind of knew it would make its way into one of the stories that I wrote, and one day like it kind of collided with the perfect narrator for it. And so it's kind of like I don't make plans, but I read a lot. I think sometimes maybe I read too much. And so like all these things kind of like juggle in my brain, and at some point I trust that they will find their way to a story if they need to.
Well, let's pull the lens out a bit. Let's pull the lens out.
All right.
And you spoke about some other stories in there, and maybe then because obviously the collection is stories have been published over a period of time. Some have appeared in the New Yorker and elsewhere. And pulling this together, can you tell us what else is going on in these stories, and perhaps what is actually you spoke a lot about the books you read and reading a lot of nonfiction. I don't know if you could tell just a little bit more about why it inspired stories rather than a novel.
It's strange because I started my career. I mean, I didn't know it would be a career, but I started writing my first book in French while I still lived in Paris. And in France, as you know, like the novel is the kingly form. Like that's what every writer aspires to. There's not even a thought of writing a short story. It's almost like a dying or even a dead form by now. Like we read Maupassant in school. We read a little bit of Flaubert, Edgar Allan Poe, like in English class maybe. But the short story seems to really belong to the past, and so I didn't really get interested. I didn't even know it was alive before I moved to the US when I was like 25, and so. And my husband is really fascinated with short stories, and he gave me a list of like 200 short stories that I should read. And I kind of became really not only like fell in love with the form, but became really interested in trying to see if I could do something. And so I think my process with it is very different from the start than it is with a novel. I think, as I was saying, it's more like it's a line that I read in a book, like gives me a sort of feeling, or if like, or it bothers me and I want to explore why it bothers me. And they're more like a possibility to experiment with language also, because it's not as scary to embark on a short story than it is to embark on a novel. So I kind of play a lot with the stories, and I'm not afraid to fail. Like if it's bad, I can just explode the structure and get back to work the next day and it's fine. Whereas a novel is obviously a lot harder to steer. Once you've made a mistake, you have to go back 100 pages and find the problem. With stories, it's just a lot more fun. And so I tend to know in advance not how long, but if it's a story or a novel for sure. And it's just like kind of two elements colliding that I'm like, okay, I want to see what happens if I put like this chemical component with that chemical component and see like, kind of have fun with it. Whereas the novel, I tend to not know at all where it's going until I'm there with
the idea of the childish creativity. I think that is a thing that I've heard quite a lot. That form and that experimentation. And so the stories are primarily written in English, and then they've been published over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. They're all written in English. It's all English from now on. Because as I said, I'm making progress in English,
Yeah,
and I feel like now when I'm trying to write in French, it's a bit stilted.
right.
Like if you like English, the English language is my tool every day, and so
Mm.
it makes sense that I would get better at this writing in that language, but not
Yeah, we've had a
necessarily
couple
another.
of, and yeah, I think it's that it's very interesting. And Katarina Volckmer, who I've spoke to a couple of times on this show, she's German.
Hmm.
She writes English, and she says, and on the subject of humor, actually, she says that the German language is not very funny.
Hmm. Yeah.
And is that the same for French? Because humor is a real tool for you, isn't it?
Well, French is funny, and like there's some things that you can do with French that you can't with English, and there's this very this exercise of like swapping syllables, and like it's called the contrepétrie in French, and it doesn't exist in English. If you swap syllables, it creates an
Conto.
entire joke. Contrepétrie, yeah, like it's a perfectly like innocuous sentence, but then if you swap syllables, it becomes like dirty or naughty or like
Oh.
and so like that's a real kind of punny game that French does. And I asked my husband if there was an equivalent in English. Yes, you'd never heard of it. So like it can be funny in some ways, but it's a little bit, I mean, of course it can be funny, but the English is a lot quicker in expressing, similar things. It has a lot of prepositions going on. And I have to translate my English works into French. So now I can see that, they're usually like 10 or 15% longer when I translate them into French. And so like there's a quickness to English that
Mm.
as I was saying, like when we were talking about death, and I want a lot to happen on the page, I want it to be moving all the time, even though the stories are not extremely plotty. I want each sentence to kind of be very muscly. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I think English is my language for that, and French is a little bit heavier.
I can see why that could be then a problem for some of the stories and the way that you write some of the stories, because it really
Yeah.
relies on that sharpness, that wittiness, whether it's in the
Yep.
humor,
Yep.
the drollness, the droll, which is the French word, but the droll in English is a little bit different, isn't it? It's that kind of
Yep.
laconic humor that really shapes some of the interactions
Yep.
and the observations that you make.
Yep.
What we might do is might have a quick break on the
Okay.
written pages.
Okay.
But do come back. We're going to talk more about Camille Bordas's stories, One Son Only. Did you know that there is a Rippling Pages Patreon, and for a small monthly fee, you can get exclusive member benefits. This includes Rippling Pages merchandise, specially curated craft insights and close reads, which might very well be of some of Camille's stories, and exclusive reveals of upcoming guests before anybody else. You also get a shout out on the show. So if you pay for that subscription, me and the writer, we will give you a much deserved shout out on the Rippling Pages. So if you fancy it, there is a link in my show notes. Otherwise, it's just great to have you here. Okay, let's get back into it. Let's talk more about One Son Only by Camille Bordas. How's your back? Is it okay?
It's okay. It's okay. As long as I'm
Okay.
standing, it's fine. It's just there's
Okay.
nowhere comfortable in this rental, so it's better to just
Okay.
stand.
No worries. Have you got your coffee?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, welcome back to the Written Pages. Welcome back, Camille. Should we get into it?
Yes.
It'd be awkward if you said no, wouldn't it? But now shared understanding at least. Um, but as well as there's comedy, there are jokes, there are dreams, there are
Mhm.
nightmares that you write about. And one of the words that I couldn't pick it, and I was preparing this interview, and the word that I wrote in my notes was animation, and I thought, is there a better way of saying this? And I couldn't find a better way of saying it. What it seems like you're really in all of these, because these are about language
Mhm.
and they're about hidden meanings, I guess,
Yeah.
or slips in some instances.
Yeah.
And it feels like that you're trying to find ways to understand what brings a language alive. And if I think back to your earlier novel, Material, there are lots of discussions within that. There's about an MFA, about joke
Mhm.
writing and create
Yeah.
and stand up, but you
Yeah.
you get all of these little interactions, which is ironically quite funny, about how do you make a joke funny. And it's this seems to be this idea that you're trying to play with. What brings things alive.
Well, intense revision. I think it's not like I'm really fascinated with people who are able to write 1,000 words a day, but a good day of work for me is like 50 to 100 words. Like that's a good day. It doesn't mean that I only wrote 100 words. It means I probably wrote 2,000 and deleted like 1,900. And
Yeah.
as I go, like it's not like, oh, I write 2 pages and delete them. It's just like I really keep throwing things at the wall. I find a sentence I'm satisfied with and start the next 100 times. And then I find the next perfect sentence. And then, I mean, perfect, like that
Mm.
satisfies me in this moment. And so, yeah, I just, with everything that I put in place in a previous paragraph, I was like, where does it go next? And like, I think when I was younger, I would just like kind of explore and just like write a bunch and see where it was going. And I don't do this anymore. I'm just like in the moment, like, what is the next thing that is the most surprising, the funniest, or the most illogical, like that fits the rest of the story. So, yeah, how to bring, and I really like the word animation, by the way. I think it
Mm.
is a good word. But yeah, like there's a thing when you start writing that you think, um, you need to describe the landscape or you need to have these like reflective moments on the side, on the part of the narrator. And as I keep like grow as a writer, it's like, no, you don't need, like, there's no prescription that, we need to see what the room looks like. And also, I'm really not good at description, so that works for me. So I just do I follow the logic of that character and really try to go for the next logical thing without wasting anyone's time. And maybe it goes back to the obsession of like, let's not waste time. We're all going to die.
Well, it's also that, but it is, thank you for that insight. It's really interesting, but it's also that thing about it is about the language and it is about the story and it is
Yes.
about the craft, but it's also about, perhaps in relation to that idea of death or non-being, and whether it is death or not. But either way, it's just, the whole irony of that, the once and only discussion we've had is that the child has brought to life an idea of death,
Hmm.
and there seems to be something of an essence here about how what is it that animates us as people, and if that is in relation to language.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I think like I'm not a philosopher.
Mm.
So this feels like a huge philosophical question. Like I can only answer for myself. And I think, yeah, what animates me is language.
Mm.
And I was listening to like someone like I think it was a rabbi was talking about
Okay.
death. Like she wrote a book about, and I haven't read it yet, but it seemed right up my alley. Her name is Delphine, and she wrote a book about how to explain death to children. And so like so that's definitely like in line with Once and Only, but it came out like, yeah, a few months ago. And she had a line that's like, death is not the opposite of life, it's the opposite of language, which sounds really
Wow.
good. And I don't know what it means, but it rings true to me. And I think one of my biggest problems with death is that you can have a conversation with the people and they can answer back. And so I think I like to have like a quick conversation that kind of encompasses a lot that so yeah, like I love having like chatty characters. I love to have them misunderstand each other also, like in deep or
Mm.
very
Yeah.
small ways. Like they just mistake one word for another or mistake the whole point of the conversation. It doesn't matter. Like I think yeah, that's what keeps me animated.
That is very interesting and very
Mhm.
deep. I wouldn't expect you to speak for everyone, but that is a very, I'm sure that would be a feeling that people share. And I think, but on that idea, I can see why misapprehensions are so interesting to you,
Yeah.
because it's about those covert meanings that sort of slip into the everyday,
Mhm.
perhaps
Yeah.
revealing a different reality. But also, your dialogue is fantastic,
Yeah.
and it is. It reminds me of I listened to. I don't know if you know Gwendoline Riley.
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Another one.
she writes about how when she writes dialogue that she purposefully makes one character not respond to the other character, and
Mhm.
that is something that brings alive those misapprehensions.
Yes.
And you remind me a little bit of that, but it's also there's a real fluidity to it as well.
Yes.
Your dialogue,
Yeah.
and where does that come from then? Is that an observation? Is it something that comes in the creation of it? Are you sort of taking things from? Because the
Well,
dialogue can be really hard to write for those
yeah.
for
Yeah.
a writer, can't it?
And I think, yeah, that's when the delete key is very handy because like I can write like 2 pages of dialogue and then like not summarize but like shrink it down to like 5 lines. So it's not exactly natural in the way that, I mean, I haven't read all of Knausgård's novels, but I read a little bit and like the dialogue was extremely natural in as much as it was like hello, hi, how are you doing? Yes, I'm okay. How about you? Like, did you bring the beer? Like, so
Yes.
my dialogue is not natural in that way, but it tries to get at like, yeah, the kernel of, yeah, what is the shared understanding or the misunderstanding? Because it's just like how to get, again, like I try to have things move quickly because I'm really aware I'm not writing a thriller. So like the energy and the tension comes from the sentence. So like it needs to happen very fast. So it is natural, but in a artificial way,
Mm.
artificially shortened. I don't know. Misunderstandings are so funny because they're just like funny on a first layer and then on a deeper layer, it can have obviously huge consequences. And like I was rewatching The Sopranos for the fourth time, and there's like there's so much there, but like they misunderstand each other constantly, either because there's a bad phone connection or just like because of a weird accent or something. And so it's just like it drives the plot, and in their case with like massive consequences sometimes. Yeah, language has consequences, it's not
Mm.
all murders and alien invasion. Sometimes you just misunderstand a word and can just, blow your life apart. So,
There's a warning for
yeah.
you all. But it is, we live in a world where that feels
Yeah,
quite accentuated at the moment, doesn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
We have to be careful about the words we choose,
Yes.
but also what about how we misunderstand ourselves as people? Because there's a
Well,
lot of
that, yeah.
characters within your stories that they get it wrong. They get it
Yeah.
wrong, and they
Yeah.
don't really understand within themselves what the the truth is of their
Yeah.
reality. But they get themselves wrong, don't they? Basically.
Yeah, but yeah, like we do that all the time. I mean, I don't know if it's the case for you, but I don't have a full-on understanding of what makes me do what I do, or I think it's again like it can be very funny to explore that. I think also there's not an imposition of the culture, but like yeah, like they want like there's like oh get to know yourself, like really meditate, get in touch with your like trauma or get in like go to therapy, which is great for a lot of people. I don't think it's like it should be an obligation. And there's this story understanding the science where like one of the
Mm.
characters, she's a side character, but still like she just doesn't believe in therapy. And so she doesn't like there are people who actually don't want to know themselves, and I can absolutely respect that. I pick and choose what I know about myself. Like there's some things like as long as I'm not hurting anyone, like I can be fine with all the things I'll never know about my reasoning or logic or
I guess, yeah, I guess there is something to be said for that, isn't it? You need to be comfortable with not knowing things about yourself as much as
Mhm.
you do trying to know yourself, and that can be
Yeah.
difficult character sometimes. I mean, I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about that character in understanding the science and.
There is a character who kind of posits that the more you know about yourself, the more useful you are to society. And like she gets some pushback from a couple, like from one mainly. It's like, no, like knowing yourself doesn't help anyone
Mm.
else but you. And so there's two different characters who don't really believe in self-knowledge. One because she thinks she knows everything already, and one because she's afraid that there's not that much to know. And that
Yeah.
would be stressful to realize that actually there's not that much about me that makes me me. And
Mm.
so she doesn't want to dig at that. She's content, like, I mean, content might not be the word, but she's okay not knowing more than she does.
Yeah, but there's a real melancholy to that story as well, and
Oh,
perhaps
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
felt that a lot more than I did in the other stories because it focuses
Yes.
around someone's cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess the opposition to that then is, I guess, why would that diagnosis trigger that journey for them? In the other ways that, when we talked about, I guess, illness and death, it hasn't done for the other characters.
Well, we meet the characters they're actually celebrating the remission of
Mm.
their friends, so it's not as dark as it sounds. However, I think it got them all a little too close to thinking about their own mortality, obviously, and so like they've all come away. Yeah, it's a group of friends. They're all
Yeah.
in their 40s, and I think they didn't expect to have to think about it so young or so early, and so I think they've all kind of. I think this character who wants to know herself more and is like trying to track her carb intake and all of that, like know yourself on many, many levels, not just
Yeah.
like the way her brain works, but the body and all that. Like I think it can take you in like very different directions of I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I never die, or like I'm going to take care of myself and know myself, and the others are like, you know what, it's going to happen anyway, so I might as well enjoy it.
That's one of those stories also where sort of the narrative arc of your stories is not linear.
Yeah, no.
And it also, I don't know whether it's informed by some of the themes that you're talking about, but it kind of really, it doesn't, it doesn't, not to say that every, story should follow a particular narrative arc, but it's one where, and it's one where it made me think, how do you plot that out? Is it plotted
Yeah.
out, or is it more
It's yeah, no, it's not plotted out at all. It's like none of these stories are. I'm right now working for the first time in my life on a book that is semi-plotted.
right?
I know a couple things about it that are gonna happen. But no, this is more like what I was talking about with experimenting and having fun with the form of the short story. This one is like it's a third person narrator. So I was like, you get midway through the story, maybe like three-quarters of the way through the story, I was like, oh, what if like now I jump to this side
Mm.
character and because he became interesting to me, the character of the actor that kind of crashes their dinner party. And so um it is strange because like that's definitely a story that uh, my mother doesn't comment a lot on my work, but this one she sent me a text that I didn't understand this one, and I'm like,
Okay.
I don't fully either. I do think like there it does create. It is it unsettled me a little bit that it went there. It's this character, yeah. That yeah. I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, like it. There's this switch in perspective, and it takes us to a movie set, and so it's very far from the concerns that were raised at the dinner table between the friends. Like suddenly it's just like a Hollywood action movie, and so very different than the questions of self-knowledge and like fear of death. But they seem to echo each other in a way that, again, like one element against the other, it felt like it interested me. And so I kind of try to trust when something interests me that it will interest the reader, and it might not interest all readers. But I've had it's weird, like that's one of the stories I've had the most emails about after it was in the New Yorker. Like I usually,
Mm.
when there's a story in the New Yorker, I get a few emails for a few weeks of people who just read it or catching up on their New Yorkers. And like this one, people really liked it. And I
Okay.
didn't expect this necessarily, but I feel like there's something, yeah, unsettling about that juxtaposition that some people respond to.
Nice to get feedback as well. I'm
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does that thing of form that you're writing. It's not, I won't go. This is. I know you're experimental, but it's not an
Mhm.
experimental
No, it's not experimental, but I
by any means.
experiment. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is. It's a very. It's hard to sort of track in terms of the way it sort of comes back in on itself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is just that we talk about sort of how meanings reveal to ourselves in the world, and sometimes it is not always
Yeah.
in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of that narrative arc, and we've spoken about the way that you do or don't plot.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the stories that I felt like this is in Beyond,
Hmm.
which is I mean, as many of this, it's a wonderful story, and it's so crafted, so layered, full of little jokes, cultural references, and then it does this thing of showing a character appearing to be on a certain kind of journey. And I don't know if it relates to that idea of knowing thyself or not knowing
Hmm.
thyself.
There are, as I was saying, there are decisions that are made with every sentence you write down. And so I think like I kind of knew from the start this one would just stay in the same place with the same cast of characters, no like widening of the lens or whatever. So I think I knew where it would be set for the duration, the kinds of interactions that would go on, because it's at a weight loss camp for teenage boys and girls. And so I knew that there would be a lot of, not a lot, but some time spent in yoga class for the children and some time spent in therapy or like talking to a counselor. So I knew this would be basically the frame. So the surprises came from other aspects of the story. Yeah.
There's also some imagery within that story about dead birds that does recur in another story.
Yes. Yes.
It refers to a TV show that you've mentioned, which is The Sopranos, and you
Yes.
mentioned The Sopranos already,
Yes.
and it's on a particular dynamic within The Sopranos. When did this come to you? When did you think this has got to go in?
I mean, I have deep love for The Sopranos. I have deep love for James Gandolfini. I think he was the best actor of his generation, and like not just in The Sopranos, but everything else he was in. And I think like in terms of, I don't tend to like really feel much when celebrities die because like I don't know them, and so I mean I can see that it's sad they'll never be in anything again. But James Gandolfini was a huge. I don't know. I felt like I was fated to meet him in some way. I have a fascination for great actors, and I'm really angry when an actor is not good. Also, that's something that I analyze nonstop. Like
Oh
I
dear.
can see like why. Yeah, like I'm like when I see bad acting, I get really angry because that's a
Right.
profession that so many people are passionate about and don't get a break and whatever. But so I have a lot of love for The Sopranos, for the writing on The Sopranos, all the relationships on The Sopranos, the humor, the misunderstandings, as I was saying. Like this seems very true to life. But like what you're referring to is strange because I didn't make the connection with The Sopranos before you said it, the dead bird in the story. I
Oh
didn't
right. Well.
at all. I think I have a thing with dead birds and birds in general, and I didn't connect these two. And I think the narrator, I mean, the protagonist doesn't connect it either. So you made the connection that neither of
All
us,
right.
but it's definitely there.
Well, it's interesting because so they rip in The Sopranos. The opening scene is James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano,
Yeah,
mobster.
yeah,
Quite a formidable character, isn't he? To say the least.
yeah,
Saving this bird from his swimming pool,
yeah.
and then he
Ducks.
speaks.
Yeah,
Yeah, a duck. Sorry, yeah, that's it, isn't it? And he speaks about
yeah. It's a bird. Yeah,
right. But he speaks about it with his therapist, and that dynamic
yes,
is. I do like The Sopranos, but for all the things in TV, there's something absolutely hilarious to me about a mobster going to a therapist.
yes,
And
yeah,
the whole dynamic of therapy and psychotherapy, you're supposed to sort of reveal everything. There's certain things you can't
yeah,
talk about. What's the benefit from this? And they talk
yeah.
about the scene, but then you recreate that scene within that. Why did you do that?
I was really interested in the character, this little boy who he wants to be an actor. And I think he's a fan of The Sopranos. And so he sees an opportunity when he's finally, he's not finally in therapy. He never dreamed of being in therapy, but since he's there at this camp for this weight loss camp and he has to have these sessions with the therapist, he takes it as an opportunity to work on his craft and ask questions. And I think maybe that's you can't really know ever what someone else experiences. And so I think like what I was talking about, like trying to place myself in the shoes of the father and one son only. I think like I try to inhabit all these characters as a like way to cope with the fact that I can only be myself, and I want to try different identities and ways of speaking and ways of thinking. And so like Eugene, the kid in that story, I think he's very similar to me in that he sees the therapy as an opportunity to know what's normal and what's not, what people think. And so he's interested in the therapist, and he asks her if her experience is in line with the Sopranos therapist,
Mm.
and she kind of like always feeds him his own questions back. So she
Yeah.
never really answers because her role is not to talk about her life, you could say. Like, but I think that's very tragic in the context of Eugene because he really wants to get away from himself, and he's always sent back to like analyze his own problems and really think.
Mm.
I don't think he really wants to think that much about what brings him here. He wants to shed the weight. He's not. Yeah, and I don't think. I mean, I don't know. The way I see it now, but as I was writing, I was not really sure what it meant, if it means anything. But I just thought it was funny again, like in their dynamic, in their dialogue, to have her like repeat his questions to him. So I thought it was a funny dynamic, and as often with funny things, like it ended up being quite tragic when you realize that the kid really wants to know what she thinks,
Mm.
and then it's like, no, you're trapped within yourself. Like we're gonna focus on you right now. So
And that
yeah.
can be difficult, and that is part of therapy, isn't it? I think, and I think that, yeah, I wonder if that's, as you speak about it, one of the lingering against sadness for Eugene and for the other characters is this because he has a relationship and he doesn't give it his full attention, and
Yeah.
he's not particularly pleasant sometimes.
No.
Think he's thinking about himself a lot, but he's also not really able to sort of think about himself in the way that the therapist wants to think.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you see then in that portrayal of Tony and his therapist, Dr. Melfi, played by Lorraine Bracco?
I mean, I think it's just I don't know. Like it's I don't tend to overanalyze the things that I love because then I'm afraid to like break the magic. But I don't know. It's just like I mean, it helps that this show is, I think, perfectly written. So like I don't know, Chase wrote all the episodes, but it's just like consistency of character. Like
Mm.
he always has a reason to do what he does. There is internal logic to his character, and like Gandolfini seems to understand that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's very cliche, but it's just like when I stop seeing the acting is like it's similar when I read, when I stop seeing the writing in some way, and I'm just like out of myself conversing with an author like brain to brain, and I'm not like analyzing it, or I'm not saying, oh, he did this. It's not showing off. It's just like presenting me with the perfect version of a character, even though I know it's fiction. For a second I forget it. When art works, it's quite something.
Yeah. Do you get that same feeling with writing then? If you see a bad actor, do you get the same feeling with writing, or?
Well, when I'm writing, no, I do not enter a flow state. I never forget, unfortunately, that I'm writing. But like when I edit, however, I can sort of like be very comfortable. And I love cutting, as I was saying. It's not just deleting as I go, it's whenever I revise first draft, second draft. Like I love like shaving off syllables, sentences, entire paragraphs. Like I love lightening the thing in order, I think, to create this conversation, as I was saying, like brain to brain. Like, is the reader uh, like I tend to like imagine a reader who's smarter than me, or like at least thinks at the same speed. And so I'm trying to match the pace of a reader's brain. I'm like, oh, he doesn't need this, he doesn't need that, he doesn't like, this is condescending, this is too much information, etc., etc.
Is that where the you know, the magic happens, so to speak, when you're doing that kind of work on the story and the writing?
Well, I mean, it's hard to speak of magic at any point in the process. I don't even know what drives me to write because it's so difficult. But I think, yeah, there are, I think, magical moments where something surprises me and I'm like, oh, this is definitely the next move. And I think with the story presentation on Egypt, this occurred like a couple times. And I remember those feelings of like, oh, everything is makes sense now. For a second, I see the story and then it gets dark again. But like mornings of work where everything like they make it worth the not the struggle, but the like doubting yourself for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly you see that opening and then you just run for it, and I guess that's the magic, but it's hard to put into words. I think it's just like it's the Picasso thing that inspiration finds you at work. Like I never have a great idea, but once I'm working, sometimes after struggling with a paragraph for like 6 days, suddenly I see the way through. Like that's the beauty of it. Like that's the magic moment. But it happens like 5 times a year. But that's enough. That's enough to
numbers game. It's a numbers game after all,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
But it is all within those stories, and that's what I said in the introduction. Those really deep questions about how fiction works, because your stories are full of people trying to make things work. You know, the coloring. Goodness gracious, that's hard to say.
Yeah,
color in Colorado, the pinata story. It becomes this way of the motif suddenly works for the character.
Yeah,
it's an act of plagiarism, isn't it? Ultimately, and you know, I think to Andres, who writes the conversation books.
Yeah.
And he's really trying to create these really elaborate narratives, and the editor's like, you just don't really need to do all this stuff, and something and an old piece from a previous piece works in that. And it's just those moments of reflection do lead to a cohesive whole. I would say. And well, in any case, your stories are here to read, as your novels, and then also if you can speak French or you're interested in learning French. There's some French language to read, which I'm very, very interested in doing. But One Son Only and Other Stories is published by Serpent's Tail, and it's out now. But otherwise, Camille Bordas, thank you very much for joining me on.
Thank you so much.
Pages. Thank you.